A Strange Objection. Part 2. Theoretically waterproof. The chance is the remotest of its going much longer unnoticed that I'm not keeping pace with the headlong human race, and some of them may mind my staying back behind to take life at a walk in philosophic talk. Robert Frost. Last time we talked generally about some of the aims of the podcast. I also introduced a strange way of arguing, not limited to the mental arena. This approach doesn't directly attack or establish a proposition, but instead it interrogates the conviction of the person professing the idea. It works something like this, we said. We only really believe the ideas we act upon, or what we do not enact, we do not really believe. In this episode, we try to apply these tests to Cartesian doubt. Descartes attempts to doubt the evidence of his senses, and this episode is about whether he really does so, that is, whether he believes his own doubts to such an extent that they are really or even could be enacted. Here's a simple case I want to make. While Descartes is doubting the evidence of his senses and wondering whether he is being deceived, whether his physical body is there at all, and if his hands before his eyes are only a dream, whether he himself is entirely unreal, whether anything exists. While all of this is going on, we can note that he is making very practical use of his desk set. That is, given we have a book describing the methods of his doubts, we can be assured that however radical the doubting was, he maintained a practical confidence in inkpot and quill, pen and paper. In these things, at least, he seems to have still believed. We can conclude that as he wrote down the idea that his hand might not be real, he ensured that the grip on the drafting quill, and to this extent on reality itself, did not slacken. The legible letters, professing his eloquent doubts, disprove his conviction in them. This being the case, it is probably the sincerity of skepticism, not the persistently evident nature of reality, that his experiments compel us to doubt. Maybe one objection could be that this was a thought experiment. Maybe as such it shouldn't be subject to such a practical test. But then, let's remember that the test of enacting what we profess to believe is a test not ultimately or only of whether we enacted it or not, but of whether we, in thought, ever really believed it. Even in a thought experiment, we should like to have really doubted. We are back to the metaphor from the last episode. We are right to be dubious of theoretically waterproof boats. If what we mean by a thought experiment is an idea we indulge but do not really believe in, then it gets a pass. But again, in this case it's the sincerity of skepticism, rather than the nature of reality, that the experiment calls into question. It's a little macabre, but there's a second, stronger form of my argument that's probably unavoidable. Many extreme doubts, if practically enacted, are not only unlikely to lead to a publishing deal, but are evidently unsafe. Imagine a philosophy class, for instance. A painted chair at the front illustrates maybe Locke's distinction between primary and secondary qualities. Soon a lively discussion starts. How can we know anything is real, etc. One student is talking epistemology, justified knowledge, and another, seeming a little off the maiden road, is talking more psychedelia than sense. But before Strawberry Fields can have his full say, a fire alarm begins to ring. Then immediately, before the fire alarm can be dismissed as yet another annoyance of a false positive, black smoke begins to billow in and billow in. It's filling up the classroom. But at this point, if the professor, grateful for such an evident sensory illustration, turns to the class and continues thusly, "And this smoke, how can we be sure that it is real? Its color looks black to me, it smells smoky." The rejoinder is unlikely to be philosophically engaged. "Run, you fool," might be the appropriate reply. Our indulgence in what we hypothetically believe and enjoy bandying about has its sensible limit. There's a time to fold up the game and return urgently to reality as we know it to be, even if how we know it to be as we believe it to be is not immediately clear to us in articulate intellectual terms. Still, we know that reality asserts itself in consequence in a way that is difficult to debate. That being said, I know that there are many doubts and beliefs which are not so neatly established or tidily undermined. I'm trying to make my case as best I can in relation specifically to extreme skepticism, and I hope I don't seem to be overextending my reach beyond the territory the argument properly covers. By claiming to doubt everything, Descartes builds a great vessel and christens a mighty craft. Skepticism reads the script of the hand-lettered hall. But despite the apparent intellectual trouble with pointing out precisely where he has gone wrong, the hulking achievement can cut no water, braves no storm, but remains at solemn rest. It is still and will always be, at best, theoretically waterproof. This proposition, I am, I exist, whenever it is uttered by me or conceived by the mind, necessarily is true.